So this is part one of a four-part series on right hand fingering. And this comes from a lot of requests from the YouTube channel to address right hand fingering issues and pieces. And so I thought I'd create a four-part series to discuss essential concepts and specific ideas that we can go over and talk about. Of course, there's thousands of pieces in the repertoire and thousands of fingering combinations that are always possible, so we can't cover every single one, of course. But going over these essential concepts should clarify a few things for you and hopefully put you on the right track. In part one, what we're going to address is three basic ideas: alternating fingers, awkward string crossings, and how practicing technique will benefit your right hand fingering overall and create good right hand fingering habits. So the practicing of technique to create good right hand habits. So let's first talk about alternating fingers. It's a really easy concept to talk about, but to actually put it into practice is a little bit more difficult. And it's something that you have to address over and over and over. If you take lessons from a good teacher, they're going to point out to you time and time again about the idea of alternating fingers and not repeating any fingers. And that's the basic concept, is that when we're playing, especially with IM or MA, that we don't repeat any fingers. On the most basic level, you can go over that just with open strings, right? Going I, M, 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 I, M. And then if you do it in groups of three, it's even a little bit more challenging. I, M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I, M. And if you get really used to that, the idea of alternating fingers will come through in your playing, hopefully. But when you're playing pieces, it's sometimes very easy to repeat a finger by accident. And that's usually because of awkward string crossings or some other event. But that's the basic concept, is always alternating your fingers and never repeating any right hand fingers, with the exception of probably the thumb in bass voices. The thumb will repeat itself, of course, but in terms of melodic playing with the fingers, I am an A, not repeating any of those fingers is the central concept that you want to follow. Okay, the second thing is awkward string crossings. This is a true reason why we sometimes change fingerings in additions. So a regular string crossing would just be the I finger on the B string, the M finger on the E string. Because the M finger extends further and it's further down the hand here, it makes sense that the I finger would go on this string and the M finger on this string. The opposite would not be the most beneficial, right? So the most beneficial is an ergonomic fingering. That is, we're using our hand the way it's designed to play on the strings that are closest to those fingers. So I am, that's a normal string crossing. An awkward string crossing would be the opposite, putting the M finger on the B string, the I finger on the E string. M, I, M, I, M, I, M, I. That's called an awkward string crossing because it's not ergonomic. Now, awkward string crossings come about in our playing all the time. They can't always be avoided. For example, when you play a scale, I, am, I, am, I. You can see that I had to reach over the I finger to the G string when I got there. So it's just a normal part of playing guitars that there will be awkward string crossings. And it's not that awkward. I mean, I don't want to make a big deal of it, but it's not as ergonomic as the other combination. Of course, we get used to awkward string crossings by practicing technique and things like that, but that's on the next thing we'll talk about. So one of the things about awkward string crossings is that we will avoid them sometimes by throwing in, for example, the A finger to avoid that awkward string crossing. And you'll see that in repertoire a lot, especially in the Royal Conservatory books, for example, where right-hand fingering is in a lot of the pieces. You'll see weird combinations of I, M, and then the A thrown in all the time to avoid those awkward string crossings. And the truth is that when you're fingering something perfectly for technical ease and ergonomics, avoiding awkward string crossings is a great idea. However, you can take it too far. If you take it too far, then you're going to have crazy combinations all the time that will have to be strictly memorized and observed. So that's not ideal either, right? But like I said, it's a fundamental concept of fingering. So we've gone over the idea of alternating fingers all the time and awkward string crossings, and just the idea of trying to either avoid them or get used to them. And when we talk about, in the next part, when we talk about some specific fingerings for some specific situations, we will talk much more about the awkward string crossings. And I'll talk about it in just 1 second when we talk about technique. So that brings us to the next topic, the technique practice and how practicing technique will equal good right hand habits overall. So one of the reasons you're not going to see right hand fingerings listed on every piece is that sometimes it's kind of redundant. There's so many options we could use for it that we don't need to choose one specific one. We just apply concepts like alternating fingers. Now, practicing technique is probably the best way to get your right hand fingering under control, and your right hand technique, of course. So for the beginner student, I think it just starts with some open string exercises like we talked about, but also practicing scales. And that's scales and arpeggios, and that's a major part of it as well. So on a fundamental level, we could practice all the combinations. We could do like IM through the strings. And we also want to become comfortable with MA. And maybe also comfortable with IA. And we also want to become comfortable with 3-fingered scales. For example, AMI. AMI, AMI, A. Or actually, if we do it in groups of 2, AMI, 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 AM. Going through open string patterns like that is a wise idea, getting used to all the different combinations. And then once you're comfortable with that, applying it to scales. When we play a scale with alternating fingers, awkward string crossings occur. And it's good to become comfortable with those, because when you're playing repertoire, you can't always be throwing in some other finger. You have to become comfortable with the idea of just streaming through music with one concept. And so that was with IM. You should also become comfortable with MA. And these can be done with any scale. If you only know a C major scale, then just do it with that, for example. So that was MA. You could do 3-fingered scales. So there I was using AMI, AMI, AMI. And it gets pretty complicated because some of the string groups were only 2 notes, and then other strings you played 3 notes on that string. And so the combinations get pretty wacky, right? Like AMI, AMI. As you go through the scale, the different combinations are tricky to keep track of. One thing you can do when you're practicing technique is accent one of the fingers to help you keep track. If you try to like really, you can say it out loud, I am, but when I do that with my students, I often find that their brains just trick them. They'll say the words, but their fingerings are doing something else. I like to accent one of the fingers in order to make sure that I'm doing it. So like, I am, to make sure that I can really feel the fingering in the music. So practicing scales will really help with alternating fingers and just getting used to awkward string crossings. One of my favorite exercises are the arpeggios from Torega's The Complete Technical Studies. You can find that in Pumping Nylon. Also, pretty much any technique book, like my 20 favorite exercises has some of those in there too. Those ones really address these awkward string crossings. For example, number 5 starts with I am, and the next one is specifically an awkward string crossing. M, I. And sometimes I'll put them together just to make sure that I'm really comfortable, like. And then switch to awkward string crossing. And then the other combo, like the awkward string crossing of M and A. A on the lower string and M on the upper string. That's the awkward string crossing. As opposed to the ergonomic normal string crossing, which would be M on the G string and A on the B. And there's lots of different combinations. Number 9 is triplets. And then the awkward string crossing. So the aim of this exercise is just to get extremely comfortable with awkward string crossings so that you don't have to avoid them and you can just stream through your music and just play through your music with the confidence that you're using alternating fingers and you're comfortable. And then, for specific repertoire pieces, you can choose very specific fingerings that are the best for that particular piece. But in this case, practicing technique like this will really just help you lock in some good habits. That Torega exercises, like number 13, even goes into 3-fingered combos, like I, M, A, M, I, M, A, M, I, M, A, M, or awkward string crossings, M, I, M, A, M, I, M, A, M, I, M, A. So all these different combinations will really help. So having a good technique routine of about 20 minutes to half an hour, but let's just say 20 minutes or 15 minutes, with a wide variety, so scales, arpeggios, slurs, shifts, bars, all these kinds of techniques, and then with good right-hand fingerings in your technique, so having a good book like Pumping Nylon or Izanola's book or my books or whoever's, someone trusted, will help you get these concepts under control. So that's the first thing you should do this week, is consider the idea of alternating fingers and really keeping track of them when you're practicing. Awkward string crossings, and right now just focus on the idea of what is an awkward string crossing and just noticing when they occur. And then to put it into practice a variety of technique with multiple right-hand fingerings, making sure that you're alternating your fingers and you're getting used to awkward string crossings, and that you're just practicing technique so that you learn good habits. In the next video in this 4-part series, we're going to look at some very specific situations where right-hand fingering needs to be altered away from an idea of like a concept like alternating fingers. We're going to talk about some specific situations where you might throw in the A finger when you're generally alternating I, M. So make sure you stay tuned and watch the next video so that you can see situations where the concept must be broken in order to facilitate whatever's happening in the music. So that was part 1, and there'll be 3 other videos on this 4-part series on right-hand fingering for classical guitar.